This is the fourth video of the Research Methods Qualitative Data Analysis series. This video is about thematic analysis and coding procedures. In this session, we will define what coding and thematic analysis are. We will look at practical steps to conducting thematic analysis. We will have an overview of different approaches to coding. We will look at a brief example of how to develop a coding frame and structure for data analysis. And in the end, we will assign a homework activity to practice coding and doing thematic analysis using the sample of transcripts from the interview that Shiphar and Ric recorded for our training and which we shared in the previous sessions. As defined by Brown and Clark, thematic analysis is a method for systematically identifying, organizing, and offering insight into patterns of meaning, themes, across a dataset. Through focusing on meaning across a dataset, thematic analysis allows the researcher to see and make sense of collective or shared meanings and experiences. What is important is that the patterns of meaning identified are relevant to the focus of the research and help answer the research question. Thematic analysis is also particularly useful as a method for analysis when using participatory research with the aim of communicating research results to a wider audience without necessarily needing a specific theoretical background. Here we will have a brief look at 6 practical steps to carry out thematic analysis, drawing on the work of Brown and Clark. The first step, familiarizing yourself with the data, involves immersing yourself in the data by reading through it and writing summaries. For the second step, generating initial codes, we will have a closer look to coding later. However, briefly, this stage entails labeling pieces of content to describe different aspects of your data and focus on the micro level of things. The third step is searching for themes. At this stage, you start generating themes, which are core concepts that carry the essence of the data and differ from the descriptive nature of summaries. You also need to have all the data extracts that belong to each theme. Then you look at similarities, connections, and patterns to define a broader structure. Here, the focus is on the macro level. Step number 4 is reviewing potential themes. After identifying themes, you need to refine them. It's like a quality control where you double check the relationships among them and with the whole data set. You may decide to split, merge, or even discard some themes. Step number 5, defining and naming themes, has to do with the fact that once you have confirmed the main themes, you need to name them in a way that captures their essence and include a brief description. The last step, producing the report, shouldn't actually start at the end. Writing isn't something you do after completing the analysis. While analyzing, you will have been writing memos, informal notes, reflections, summaries, and more critical interpretations. Based on the format of your report, you will organize the final write-up by ensuring that all themes are presented in a logical way to present a coherent story. Coding entails labeling and systematically organizing unstructured data from interview transcripts, field notes, documents, videos, and so on, in order to determine themes, relationships, and patterns between them. It can be done by hand using a document processor and/or a software like Atlas TI and Vivo or Taget. It can be deductive or inductive. In the deductive approach to coding, you have a predefined set of codes assigned to the data. Predetermined codes may be based on a specific conceptual framework used or topic area of interest. For instance, agroecological farm interventions or farmer research networks inclusion practices. The challenges include that starting with predefined codes may incur the risk of having a bias towards the expected answers and may overlook other important information in the data. Some examples of deductive coding can be agroecological farm interventions may, for instance, use agroecological principles as codes to identify the extent of their implementation. Farmer research networks inclusion practices may use codes derived from the farmer research network principles in order to determine their degree of implementation. In inductive coding, codes are open as they are derived from the data and allow theory to emerge from data. Typically, this is an approach used within grounded theory. When looking at individual data samples, codes can be assigned based on relevant or important topics that arise. When looking at a set of data samples, we usually find that there will be recurrent codes among them, but may also need new ones. Other times, we may need to split a code into two or change an existing one after we have gone through the whole dataset. Challenges includes the fact that it requires a systematic approach in order to avoid miscoding data, which takes more time and energy. It is important to note that the two approaches are not mutually exclusive and they can often be combined. For instance, we could start by using a deductive approach by applying some codes based on our topic of interest and then develop new ones inductively based on recurrent and relevant aspects from the data. The approach we undertake to coding will differ slightly based on who is doing it. Is it you, the person who did the transcriptions, a person allocated only for coding, or will they also carry out the analysis? Or perhaps, is there a larger team where different people are assigned different roles, such as transcribing, coding, analyzing? Depending on who is carrying out the coding exercise, there will be several things that will be arranged accordingly. For instance, in my case, when I get the chance, I prefer to personally transcribe audio interviews and carry out the coding exercise. In this way, I feel that I develop more insights and a closer relationship with the data, which help me develop a more accurate relationship with it and a more insightful interpretation. The excerpt in the red speech bubble in the middle shows a made-up interview from a study with an interest in exploring farmers' experiences transitioning towards agroecological practices, where a farmer participant shares that employing agroecological practices has improved the quality of the soil in the household, but they were difficult to start because of water scarcity. Coding is an exercise that helps us label segments of text data by capturing important ideas of themes, which we will later organize and structure to make sense of it. The colored boxes on the screen are just to show that there are several approaches to coding based on the nature and the focus of the research study, as well as the data analysis approach used. The types of codes used by each one are slightly different, but we won't get into the nuances of that in this video. Instead, for the purpose of this series, we will try to understand the role of coding when using thematic analysis as a data analysis approach. It is also important to remember that coding is often used in combination with different types of memos within text data. When we talk about memos, we refer to comments and reflections that we may write on the side or bottom of the page, where we have our field notes or transcripts with insights about methodological, critical, theoretical, and other aspects. These are helpful to support the analysis process. We will now take a break to digest some of the information from the previous slides and ask questions. To develop a coding frame, we go through our dataset and assign the first round of codes to various data excerpts. In this process, the research questions or research interests and/or theoretical framework can guide us. Once we have assigned the first codes, we will go through other data excerpts looking for similar content that could belong to those same codes. We can then have another round through the datasets to review the codes assigned and decide whether changes are needed. Once we have developed a list of codes that are relevant to the data and the research interest, we will collate the excerpts of data from various datasets, for instance, interviews, field notes, and so on, with their codes. We can then look for themes in our codes and group them into categories. For instance, from the previous example, the codes improves soil quality and difficult start with water scarcity may respectively fall under the main categories such as successes and challenges of the main theme, implementing agroecological practices. The categories we have obtained, as briefly mentioned earlier when we looked at the coding approaches, will need to be structured based on their relationships. That is to say, the axial coding. This may require creating also main and subcategories or themes. After having hierarchically structured the categories and themes, we need to evaluate the themes and the thematic structure. That is to say, we need to check whether they can be arranged in a more appropriate way and check how many entries you have in each theme and whether they can be incorporated into other ones or split or even need to be discarded. To visually represent the example mentioned earlier, our overarching theme would be implementing agroecological practices. Then, the two main categories representing the positive and negative aspects identified in the data will be successes and challenges, under which we can place our subcategories of improved soil quality and difficult start with water scarcity. Upon reviewing the structural organization of the themes and categories, though, we may find that we need to add another layer of categories where soil quality falls under the broader category of biophysical and difficult start with water scarcity under that of resources. Some useful tips include using a codebook to track all your codes, for instance, Excel spreadsheets or Word documents. And in the codebook, assign a description to the code based on the theme or notion it refers to, together with the date and the person who created the code if working within a team. It is important to create codes that are generic enough to be applicable to multiple data excerpts, but at the same time precise enough for the process of analysis. It is helpful to have codes that contrast with each other, with a view to having the positive and negative aspects of a topic or theme. Codes should group portions of data related to the same theme. And when there are more than one coder within a team, it is good practice to have them check each other's coding to ensure accuracy. After having completed coding and the steps where we define categories and themes, as well as their relationships in a logical way, we will develop a narrative and a write-up. As an activity to carry out at home, you can use the transcripts developed for session 3 from Ric and Shiphar's interview to practice coding and conducting the steps to thematic analysis based on the research question of your choice. If you haven't developed your own transcripts, after this session we will send a sample copy from the transcripts I developed without addressing a specific research question. These are some useful resources in order to explore some of the points covered in more detail. In case you're interested, the slides for this presentation, as well as lots more resources, can be downloaded from our website at statsforsd.org/resources. Thank you very much.